Maybe we should wait 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Come in.
Yeah, Nicola, and you'll introduce David, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So just, if it's fine with you, David, usually we have people ask questions during the talk. But if you prefer to have all questions at the end, we can also.
Maybe at the end is better. Yeah.
You prefer the
Yeah,
end?
okay.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we'll try to not interrupt too much then.
Okay, thank you.
Only if it's just a question, but.
Sure.
So are classes online at Stony Brook, or
yes,
hybrid?
yeah.
Or everything is online? Okay.
Everything, yeah. I think maybe in the spring semester will be online as well. Yeah.
Okay.
You think we should start, Vital?
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Nicola.
Yeah, I think we have enough people. So, so I'll keep the introduction short, but today for the seminar, we are very pleased to welcome David Gu. So David is an associate professor at the Department of Computer Science at Stony Brook University. So David has an extremely prolific body of work in the field of computational geometry. So I actually encourage you to check his website because there are lots of very cool geometric pictures and geometric animations there. But he has also some other research interests, in particular deep learning and neural networks. So I guess today's talk is going to be a bit of both. So geometric understanding of deep learning, and David, whenever you want.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, thank you for the invitation. So today I'm going to report our recent research. So we try to understand deep learning through geometric point of view. So this is a collaboration, okay, with Professor Xintong Yao from Harvard, my previous advisor, Professor Dimitri Samaras from Stony Brook, Professor Feng Luo from Rutgers, and many other mathematicians and computer scientists. So we know that deep learning is really popular today, but the understanding of deep learning remains really primitive. So we try to understand the following three fundamental problems. So the first one, what does a DL system really learn? The second, how does a DL system learn? So does it really learn or just memorize? So how can we justify that? Then how well does a DL system learn? So does it really learn everything or have to forget something? Okay, so from geometric point of view, then we can give short answers to these three questions. So the first one, so for statistical learning, basically they try to learn a probability distributions on manifolds. So therefore, there are two keywords. One is a manifold, one is a probability. Okay, then we try to learn the manifold structure. Also, we try to learn the distribution on this manifold. Then how does a DL system really learn? So basically, they just do optimization in the space of all probability distributions on the manifold or Wasserstein space. And from our mathematical model, we can see the DL system both learns and memorize. But the current DL system have fundamental flaws. Okay, so design has some disadvantages. So then the mode collapsing is unavoidable. So we try to justify that and give some physical experiment. So we know that for computer vision, so there is a well-accepted Helmholtz hypothesis. So we know half the brain is devoted to vision. Then Helmholtz believe that. So vision solve an inverse problem. So basically, inferring the most likely causes of the retina image. So in deep learning language, the brain learns a genetic model of visual images. Then the visual perception is to infer the latent variables of this kind of genetic model. Then the genetic model with its multiple layers, okay, in the latent space form a representation for our visual world. So basically, for representation or learning, the basic idea is that the brain represents a concept, okay, by a group of neurons or latent variables. So then that forms some special latent code or some special embedding. So basically, we embed the concept into a Euclidean space, okay? So which is sometimes called latent space. So that's the one hypothesis in computer vision. So then in mathematics language, so basically that can be formulated. So the intrinsic pattern for big data can be formulated by manifold distribution law. So a natural data class can be treated as a probability distribution defined on the low dimensional manifold, okay, embedded in a very high dimensional ambient space. So here we can show some example. So we have a Yann-LeCun's MNIST handwritten digit. Then each image is 28 by 28. So we treat a small image as one example. So the dimension for each point is 784. Then we're using Hinton-Tisney, we can embed the point cloud to the 2D plane. So here we have 10 digits, 0, 1, 2, 9. So here we have 10 clusters. So each cluster corresponding to one digit. Then the mapping is 1-to-1, okay, and invertible. So this means that the ambient space for MNIST dataset is 784 dimension, really high, but the dimension for the point cloud is only 2. So therefore, so that the point cloud itself is a surface. So here we can see the correspondence between the cluster in the latent space, okay, to the data manifold. So then for deep learning, people develop different methods for this kind of manifold embedding. So this one using Semi-discrete, and this one using UMAP. So basically, different methods, they are just doing the same thing. Embed the high, the low dimensional manifold in high dimensional space to the latent space. Okay, so here we see that we have a 10 cluster. So each cluster, okay, representing one digit. So if we sample in the latent space, but here actually we do 10 by 10 sampling. So then you'll see that if the sample is inside the cluster, we get a very clear, okay, image here. But if the sample is between different clusters, we get a mixed, okay, very obscure image here. So this explains, okay, why some generating examples for today's deep learning system is not so good, because the example in the wrong place. We need to detect the boundary for each cluster. We need to see the gaps among the clusters. Okay, so basically, so then we can translate the language from deep learning to topology. So we have image space, okay, Rn. We have data manifold. Then we build a local chart. So each mapping is called encoding. Okay, so that the inverse is decoding. Then we can test this idea using deep learning system for something visible. So here we have a 2-dimensional surface embedded in R3. Then we can flatten the surface to the 2D plane. So this is the encoding map. The inverse is decoding. But there are infinitely many encoding maps. We can get different encoding map. But in deep learning, we try to preserve probability distribution. So suppose the distribution on the surface is uniform. So if we're using the first encoding map, so if we're uniformly sampling here, then when we pull back, we get a highly non-uniform distribution on the manifold. So the head part is really sparse, the belly part is really dense. So this means that this kind of encoding destroys the original probability distribution. So if we're using the second encoding, we see that if we uniformly sample here, we get a uniform sample here. So therefore, this map, basically we reduce the dimension, but also we preserve, okay, the probability measure. So therefore, this is the ultimate goal for deep learning. We try to learn the manifold structure. Okay, we also try to learn the distribution. So therefore, there are 2 major tasks. So one is a manifold structure, one is a probability distribution. So this gives us the diagram for a generative model in deep learning system. So basically, given the training data from a data manifold, then by encoding, decoding, we map it to the latent space. Okay, so decoder map back from parameter domain to the original manifold. So each point here corresponding to a point, okay, on the manifold. Okay, then this gives you the manifold structure. For probability distribution, so basically, we can construct a white noise, okay, like uniform distribution or Gaussian distribution in the latent space. Then we compute a transportation map from white noise to the latent code. Okay, then the DNN encode this map. Okay, then we know that deep neural network can only represent mappings. So therefore, the whole probability distribution information is encoded by this mapping. Okay, then we generate a one white noise here, map to the latent code. Okay, by decoder we get one point on the manifold that will generate some images. Okay, so this is the simplest generative model. There are different methods, okay, for computing this kind of map. So we propose to using optimal transportation map. Okay, that one shown here. So there are different methods to do that. So recently, somebody using a flow method based on Lawrence, okay, LDD-MM's idea using a vector field to drive diffeomorphism to realize this kind of mapping. Or somebody using Gaussian mixture, and somebody using a Jeeves, okay, distribution. So different method, but the goal is the same: finding the transportation map between white noise and the data distribution. Okay, so then if we do this for human facial image generation, same thing. So we treat each face surface as a one point. Then the whole point cloud for all the human faces form a low dimensional manifold in the high dimensional image space. Then we learn the manifold structure, okay, map a neighborhood to the latent space. Then we learn the distribution, okay, and finding the transportation map from white noise to the latent distribution. Same framework. So in that case, if we get one white noise, then through the transportation map, through the decoder, we can generate a very realistic, okay, looking human facial image. So then using this idea, we can understand a lot of deep learning tasks, okay? So for image denoising, so conventionally people using Fourier transform and filter the high frequency part. But for deep learning, so basically they do it in the following way. So we use a clean human facial surface photos to train this manifold. Then suppose we have a face image with noise, which is a point very close to this manifold. We calculate projection. Okay, then the closest point on the manifold give us, okay, the clean version. So basically they recast the image denoising as a projection. So here we can see, okay, some experimental result. So given a photo, we cover, okay, the original, okay, result here. So, but this method heavily depends on the data set. So if we use a cat face to train this manifold, and here we have a human facial photo, so then the projection doesn't make too much sense. So here we see that if we project a human face, okay, to the cat manifold, we get some mixture between the human face, okay, and the cat face. So this is a disadvantage for this kind of data-driven method, okay. Then how do we learn a manifold structure? So there are a lot of mathematic theory behind that. So one is Urysohn's lemma, basically given two closed set, okay, then we can find a continuous mapping, a continuous function. So restricted on A equal to 0, restricted on B equal to 1. So once we have embedding in the latent space, we try to learn this continuous function. And this gives us the classification or pattern recognition. Then for manifold embedding, so we know there's a general position theorem. So given m-dimensional manifold with a naughty structure or linking structure, then we can increase the embedding space, okay, the dimension of the embedding space. So then we can announce the manifold. So that's why in current deep learning system, so at the first several layers, people increase the number of neurons. Basically, they try to increase the dimension for embedding space. Then they reduce the dimension by projection. Then people using Whitney embedding implicitly or explicitly for the first task. So basically, we build a local embedding, then using partition unity to glue the local embedding to form a global embedding. Then we do random projection. But I like original method. Okay, so in deep learning society, people approximate mappings using a composition or simple mappings. So we know in finite element, people using linear combination or basis to approximate arbitrary functions. But in deep learning, people using composition, okay, instead of linear combination. So currently, this idea is very popular, like based on the flow idea. So we try to approximate D2 diffeomorphism. Then we find a space which is diffeomorphism with a compact support. Then within this space, we find another space which can be deduced by flow. So by designing vector field, we design the flow mapping. Okay, and within this class, we have another one, which is very close to the identity. So then the mapping in this class is very easy to be controlled and represented in deep neural network. Okay, so basically, we use the mappings in the inner space to approximate the one in the outer space. So then by this kind of nesting structure, we can enlarge the range we can approximate. Then in this layer, so we can control the Jacobian for the mapping. Then so therefore, I believe a lot of ideas or method from Professor Jung's LDD-MM can be applied for deep learning, which give us a clearer picture. So here we can visualize a simple example. So suppose we try to flatten the Buddha surface we see just now. We're using very simple autoencoder. So we have a symmetric neural network. So the first part, try to learn encoding map. The second part, learn the decoding map. So in the bottleneck, we have this kind of very few nodes there, which give us the dimension for the latent space. So for each example, we try to reconstruct the same example and minimize the L2 error between them. So although this idea is really simple, but it really works. So here we see one example. We put 30,000 examples on the Buddha surface. Using this simple network, we can flatten the surface to the 2D domain. Then we can reconstruct the original surface. By comparing the first one and the reconstructed one, we see they are very close to each other. So if we examine the geometric details, so like the fingers, the nose tip, the ear, then we see that the mapping is about 1, on 2 is a homeomorphic. So there's no overlapping, no folding, So basically, this gives us a topological homeomorphism between this one, to this one, to this one, So we use a ReLU DNN. So for ReLU DNN, we know that the mapping between each two layers is just a linear map. Then the activation, actually is a piecewise linear. So therefore, the whole neural network representing a piecewise linear mapping. Then given a data point, we can consider the activated neurons inside the network. So given 2 training examples, so if they share the same number of activated neurons, then we say they are equivalent. So by this equivalence relation, we can partition the input space to cells. So then this cell decomposition can be visualized. So for the Buddha model, we calculate the cell decomposition, as the one shown here. So you can see the input space is partitioned to many cells. by cutting by the planes, hyperplanes. So the latent space. So here we compose
David,
this,
David, sorry to interrupt. I'm just gonna mute all the participants except you, so that
okay.
you know, there are no interruptions. And then if somebody has questions, they can unmute themselves and ask.
Okay, sure.
Thanks.
No problem. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So therefore, here we can visualize the cell decomposition. So then the whole mapping between the corresponding pair of cells is linear. So therefore, ReduDN is really doing this kind of piecewise linear mapping. So kind of like a conventional finite element. But the cell decomposition is calculated during the training process. So it's not predefined. So that's the key difference from finite element. So therefore, we can estimate the number of cells. So basically, the number of cells give us an index to show the learning capability, okay, of the neural network. So then by using a computational geometry method, we can estimate the upper bound for this one. We can give a very rough upper bound for that. But on the other hand side, so if the manifold has a very complicated topology or geometry structure, then like the one shown here. So on the left, we can project to the horizontal line, the projection is homomorphic. But on the right, so no matter which direction we do projection, we cannot get a one-to-one map. So this means that we have to partition, okay, this curve to several segments. Then we can linearly map each segment to linear subspace. So then the number, okay, for the patches we need to perform is the difficulty for the manifold to be learned. So so if we have one neural network which can learn a manifold structure, then the difficulty of the manifold should be no greater than the capacity, okay, of the neural network. So this gives us a necessary condition. Then we can using piano curve to test the learning capability for arbitrary neural network. So by recursive construction, okay, we can increase the learning difficulty of this curve, okay, by this kind of exponential formula. So therefore, we can test the learning upper bound for any given ReduDN. So this gives us some kind of heuristic method to test the learning capability. So for the second task, the probability learning, this part is clearer. Okay. So we know this is the GAN model. We have a generator which convert a white noise to a data sample here. Then here we have a discriminator which compare the real distribution and the generated distribution. Okay, then the generator and discriminator, they compete with each other. So when they reach the net equilibrium, so the whole system can generate very realistic images. Human being cannot tell the difference. So so this figure is given by Goodfellow. So here in the latent space, we have a white noise. So the generator convert the white noise to the green curve here, the generated distribution. But from the data sample, we have the real distribution. So the generator try to, okay, make the generated distribution as close as possible to the real distribution. So the discriminator try to differentiate those two distributions, basically. Okay, so using our manifold setup, in the latent space, we have white noise. Then the generator map from white noise to the fake distribution on the manifold. On the manifold, we have the real distribution represented by the training examples. So the discriminator calculate the distance between those two distributions, basically. Then this can be carried out using optimal transportation, okay? So we know that given a manifold, then we consider all the probabilities on the manifold, which form the so-called Wasserstein space. Then the deep learning basically can be reduced to do optimization, okay, in a space. So there are a lot of popular methods in deep learning, like maximum entropy principle, maximum likelihood estimation, maximum posterior estimation, and so on. So all these methods can be treated as special optimization in the Wasserstein space. So therefore, we need to define a remaining metric and a variational calculus, okay, on this Wasserstein space. Then optimal transport give us such kind of theoretical tools. So basically, so in a nutshell, so given two probability distributions, then we can calculate the optimal transportation map, mapping one to the other, which can be reduced to solve motion pay, okay, type PDE. Then once we calculate the map, so the geodesic is given by McCann's displacement, so given by this formula. Then we can define tangent vector at each probability distribution, which can be treated as a gradient field. So the given two gradient fields, we can define the remaining metric. So therefore, we can carry out variational calculus in this space. Okay, but in today's deep learning society, a lot of computations is based on entropy. Then we can show that entropy is convex along geodesic. So therefore, we can using the Hessian or entropy, okay, to define another remaining metric. Then locally, we have two metrics, Wasserstein and entropy. So they are equivalent, okay, in general setup. So therefore, the current entropy optimization can be reformulated using Wasserstein optimization. Then the view from optimal transportation can give us different insights or deeper insights. Bottom, given two measure, then we try to find the mapping, minimize total transportation cost. Then such kind of mapping is called optimal. So the cost for the optimal map gives us the Wasserstein distance. Then the Counter-Roig relaxed Munch problem to linear programming. Okay, then he got Nobel Prize. By duality, we can reformulate Counter-Roig approach to the dual formulation here. So by using C transform, we can reduce only one unknown function. So in deep learning, people base on this formulation and this formulation a lot. But then in 1980s, Brunier developed another theory. So if the cost function is a quadratic distance, then the optimal transportation map is given by a convex function, the Brunier potential. So the gradient of that function gives us the map. So by measure preserving condition, we can write down the PDE for Brunier potential, which is motion pay equation here. So therefore, if we can solve motion pay equation, we can solve Brunier potential. We can get the optimal transport. Then we can measure the distance among probability distributions. But this PDE has a very strong geometric meaning from Minkowski and Alexandrov theory. So here is the well-known Minkowski problem. So given a convex polytope, so if we know, okay, the normal to each face, okay, then also we know the area of each face. They satisfy this linear constraint. Then Minkowski claimed that we can determine the shape unique up to translation. Later, Alexandrov generalized Minkowski's theorem to open convex polytope. So if we have open convex polytope, we know the normal to each face. We know the projected area, okay, on a plane, intersecting with a planar convex domain omega here. Then we can determine the shape of this convex polytope unique up to vertical translation. So if we write down the PDE for Alexandrov problem, so which is exactly the motion pay here. So therefore, we see that the Brunier potential is nothing but the Alexandrov convex polytope. So therefore, we convert the problem to a geometric one. If we can solve this geometric problem, then we can solve optimal transport. Alexandrov's original proof is based on algebraic topology, so which is not constructive. So then in 2013, Professor Yao, myself, and others gave a variational approach. So we found a convex energy. By optimizing this convex energy, we can find the solution to Alexandrov problem. So then we base our computational method using this theorem. Okay, so here we can show some example. So just now we flatten the Buddha, okay, to this unit disk. Then the mapping push forward the surface element from surface to the 2D plane. And on the disk we have uniform distribution. Then we try to finding a optimal transmission map from uniform distribution to this distribution. So here we see the computational result. So this is the Brenier potential. Then this is the lambda due, okay, to the Brenier potential. Okay, we can visualize the mapping here. Okay, then we come back to deep learning society, and then we see that the generator here finding okay optimal transmission map, okay, between white noise, okay, to the data distribution. So the discriminator computing distribution. But the goal for the whole model is try to learn the mapping from white noise, okay, to the real distribution here, okay. So therefore, by composing these two maps, we can reach our goal directly. So this means that, okay, the generator can be obtained from the optimal discriminator without further training. So therefore, the computation is unnecessary. Okay, so half of the computation is wasted. So then basically, if the discriminator and the generator, they share the intermediate result, they can finish very soon. So although it sounds very fancy, they compete with each other. We use a machine to fight machines, then we get a good result. But in fact, that's unnecessary, okay? So that is one inspiration we got from Brenier theory. But in reality, everything is a discrete. All the training examples can be treated as discrete point. Okay, so therefore, we have a bunch of discrete points. So each point is associated with a measure. So here we have a uniform distribution on the disk. So basically, we try to find a cell decomposition such that the area for each cell equal to the given measure. So each cell is mapped to a single point. Then among all possible such kind of cell decompositions, we try to find the one minimizing the total transmission cost. Okay, so then by Brenier theory, we know there must exist a convex function. So the gradient of convex function give us the mapping. So the convex function must be piecewise linear because we want to map each cell to a single point. So basically, any example here corresponding to a hyperplane, the gradient of a hyperplane equal to this example, but the height is unknown. Then we calculate, so here we have many examples. Then we have many hyperplanes. We calculate the upper envelope for the hyperplanes. Then that gives us the Brenier potential. By adjusting the heights, for each plane, we can adjust the projected area for each cell, such that the area, equal to the given measure for each point. So therefore, eventually, what we try to learn is this kind of piecewise linear convex function, or the upper envelope for the supporting functions. Then from this picture, we can answer, the first question. So we know that for current deep learning, the number of neurons, must be 20 or 30 times of the training samples. So therefore, the DN has a very large capacities. Then the people always puzzled whether a DN really learn anything or just memorize everything. So then using our Brenier potential model, so we see that all the YIs are the given training samples. So therefore, the DN really memorize everything. But also the heights are learned, are computed. So this controls the probability distribution. So therefore, we see that DN both memorize and learns, So then from the optimal transportation model, we answer the first question, But then we try to analyze the complexity for computing the optimal transport. So the major difficulty is that, so during optimization, the connectivity is always changing. So the triangulation is always changing. So we want to understand the upper bound for the combinatorial complexity. So this can be reduced to Gelfand theory. So basically, if we fix the point with all possible triangulations, so which is given by secondary polytope, and then so in our case, all the triangulations must be regular because they are induced by convex polytope. But in that case, okay, the total number for possible triangulations is given by this. So here, n is the number of points. Okay, d is the dimension. So then we see this is highly complicated. But then during every optimization, maybe across the secondary polytope, but the length of the path is given by this formula. So therefore, for each optimization, okay, the total number of possible triangulations is a polynomial, okay, with respect to the number of points, okay. Although all possible triangulations is exponential, but for every, okay, the whole optimization process is polynomial, okay. Then we try to understand the singularity for the mapping. Basically, that's the regularity theory for motion pay equation. So we know classical Kappa-Reilly result. Also, we know, okay, the one from Martrödinger and Wang. So all the conventional method,
Okay.
they have. Okay.
I have a question in your previous slide when you were counting the number of triangulations.
Sure.
So you are counting the total number of regular triangulation of endpoints,
Right.
and it turns out to be exponential.
Right.
So looking from a deep learning perspective, don't you think that counting the number of triangulations should have some restriction on the labels of those endpoints? Because at the end of the day, the cells that are made by a neural network respect the labels, right?
Right. Yeah. But here we just try to learn. We model the target distribution as a Dirac sum. Okay. Basically, given different training examples here. So each training example has a measure. We try to learn, okay, the OT map from uniform distribution here. Then when we do optimization, then each point here will be allocated a cell here, so that the cell will change dynamically. Then the triangulation here will change accordingly. So we can say in the following way: we consider all possible, okay, all possible Alex-Sandov convex polytope. So or all possible, okay, power diagrams. So which is a convex space, so that the dimension is high as well. Then that dimension is partitioned, okay, by cells. So each cell corresponding to a triangulation here. So we try to understand how many cells in that space, in the admissible solution space. And also that's an admissible solution space. But also, when we do optimization, we draw a curve or straight line within the space. We want to see how many cells we cross, okay, along the whole process. So therefore, by Gelfand theory, we get the total number of cells is this one, but for each optimization, okay, the line will cross so many numbers triangulations. Yeah, so in this case, we do not consider the label yet. Yeah, but after we do that, we can consider. Yeah, I will explain in the later part.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, no problem. But if we pay attention to see that all conventional methods, they have very strong assumption for the support for the target domain. So they assume omega star must be convex. So, but you know, for deep learning, we cannot guarantee, okay, the target measure support is convex. Okay, then recently, so here we show a very good example. We have a human face surface. We map to the plane using Riemann mapping. Then we're using the surface area, okay, measure defined on a disk and find the optimal transportation map between them. Then you can see the Brunner potential is really smooth. The Lorentz is also smooth. But for concave case, okay, so recently Figali has one paper on that. So this is given by Figali, then we calculated. So given target domain, which is a non-convex, then in the source domain, there are some, okay, singularity set. So if we pay attention to see gamma 1 here, if we approach gamma 1 from top, so the image will approach to the top. If we approach gamma 1 from bottom, so the image will approach here. So then the Brunner potential is a C0 at gamma 1 point. So the subgradient at that point give us a straight line here, okay? So for the bifurcation point here, okay, the subgradient will cover this triangle. So for this point, the subgradient will cover this hole, okay? So therefore, so if the target domain is non-convex, then the OT map is not continuous. So there will be singularities. When we cross the singularity, the mapping is discontinuous, okay? So here, then we prove a simple theorem showing that. So given irregular shape, okay, like the one shown here, we calculate the OT map between, okay, uniform distribution in the disk to this one. So then that's the computational result. So then you see the singularity side here. So you see the Brunner potential is a C1 almost everywhere, except at this kind of singularity sites. So at singularity, okay, the Brunner potential is only C0, okay, then but it's still convex. So then we show that given this shape, we can calculate the medial axis, okay, so like the one shown here, the medial axis. Then the singularity side actually is homotopic to medial axis. So we know medial axis is very well known in computational geometry field. It's very popular. So in that case, if the surface is non-convex, so there must exist medial axis, and there should be singularity for OT map. Okay, so here we show the topology is more complicated. That's the medial axis. Then here we see the singularity for the OT map. Okay, so they are isotopic to each other. Okay, but in this case, so if the shape is close to be convex, okay, then the medial axis is outside, okay, the ohmic domain. In this case, we may avoid singularity. Okay. So if we do for okay, for discrete case, same thing. So if the target is dumbbell here, then we see the singularity set here. When we cross the singularity, then the mapping is not continuous. So if we increase dimension, okay, so here we show higher dimension. We try to find the OT map between the uniform distribution within the solid bunny, okay, then to the solid ball here. So then you see that, okay, the solid ball, okay, has a lot of foldings. So when we cross the foldings, the mapping is discontinuous, okay. So basically this picture holds for arbitrary dimension, okay. So therefore, then we can explain the mode collapse in deep learning. So we know that in deep learning, so GANs are very difficult to train and very sensitive to hyperparameters. And they suffer a lot from mode collapsing, meaning if we ask them to learn 10 modes, they will miss some of them. Or sometimes they can generate all the modes, but they generate very unrealistic examples. Okay, so so the instability, okay, also the mode collapsing, all of them can be explained using regularity theory, OT map. So basically, we know that so deep neural network can only learn continuous mappings, but the translation maps are discontinuous on singular sites. So namely, the target mapping are outside the functional space or DNNs. So these conflicts induce okay, instability or mode collapsing. But then how can we avoid mode collapsing or mode mixture in the deep learning? So basically, if we see this picture, we can visualize the OT map. So basically, we have cell decomposition here. So each big cell is mapped to one cluster. Then the gaps here actually corresponding to the boundary of all the cells here, okay, all the singularities. So therefore, you see the mapping here is definitely not continuous. So therefore, this mapping itself cannot be represented using a DNN. But if we consider the Brunner potential, so the Brunner potential is a C0 everywhere, and a C1 almost everywhere. Then the Brunner potential can be learned by deep learning. So therefore, we should represent Brunner potential instead of representing the grid map or the OT map itself. So this will solve the problem for mode collapsing. Okay. So here we can visualize the discontinuity for the real data set. So then everything so far is just a hypothesis. Can we really validate, okay, our assumption that in current deep learning system, there are a lot of singularities. So then we use a human facial photo to do the following experiment. So we train the data manifold using a C-level A HQ. Then we get this data manifold. Then we use an autoencoder, map the manifold to the latent space. Then we calculate the OT map, okay, and calculate the Brunner potential in the latent space. So the dimension for latent space is 120 dimension, still very high, but it's doable. Then we draw line segment, okay, in the white noise. So they will be mapped to curves, okay, by the transposition map. So they map to curve in the data manifold. So each curve representing a morphing sequence from one phase to another phase. So here we can see a small video here.
Sorry, David, can I just ask one quick question?
Sure.
When you model the Brunner potential by a neural network, you still need to do you impose the convexity condition on the Brunner potential?
Yes, yes, we do. Yes, yeah.
So do you put some? How do you constrain that convexity?
Basically, the Brunner potential is a maximum linear functions. So basically, you have a lot of linear functions. Then you take the max. Okay, basically you're taking the upper envelope, so that guarantee the convexity. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I add another question? Is this then formulated in these terms of input convex neural networks? Is it then an input convex neural network?
This just using a general neural network. We do not use a special network. Yeah. So basically, the computation will guarantee the convexity for the Brunner potential. Yeah. Okay. So here we get curves on the data manifold here. So each curve actually is a morphing sequence. So here we can see. Okay. So each window representing one curve. So I'm not sure the network speed, but then if you focus on each window, you'll see a curve, okay, on the data manifold. So then everything is just learned using an autoencoder plus optimal transportation map. Then no other knowledge from anatomy, anything else, or physics, just by statistics. So therefore, you'll see the smooth transition from one point to another point, okay? But then our goal is try to detect the singularity, okay? So if there exists a singularity, so if we are lucky enough, if we draw a line across the singularity, then we can see the boundary of this manifold. But at that time, we have no idea what's the meaning for the boundary of human facial, okay, photo, okay, manifold. So until we really found the example, okay, so let me explain. So here we see every row representing one curve on the manifold, okay. Then so the boundary meaning some phase, okay, which is feasible, okay, allowable, but we have a 0 probability to encounter in reality, because this is the support for the probability distribution. So that the boundary is a probability 0 cases, okay. Then so we try a lot, but we get a lot of human faces. But then later we found some, okay, like the one shown here. So we start with a brown-eyed boy. Then we add with a blue-eyed girl here. So then the curve will do translation between them. But in the middle, we generated a lot of faces. One eye is blue, and one eye is brown. So this kind of person really exists, but we have a 0 probability to encounter in reality. So therefore, they are in the boundary of the data manifold. Okay, so this side is brown eyes, this side is blue eyes. Then here we have a gap. This gap is captured by the singularity, and we already detected. Okay, then I searched the web. We found such kind of example. So one eye is brown, and then one eye is blue. Okay, but for the training data set, there's no such kind of face. All the face has the same color for both eyes. But then using this learning model, we can find the boundary case. Okay. So therefore, this experiment shows that the manifold has a concavity, okay, in the latent space. So therefore, the OT map has a singularity set. We can detect the boundary for the feasible human facial photo. Okay. So then we propose the following model, try to eliminate the mode collapse. So we know that for deep learning, there are two major tasks. One is manifold learning, one is probability learning. So the probability learning can be carried out by solving motion pay equation using our geometric model. So this part actually is the troublemaker. So conventional design, they combine those two together, make the whole thing very difficult. But then we separate them. So we're still using DEN to learn the encoding decoding map. Then we're using our geometric method to compute this OT map. Okay. So it has a lot of merits. So basically, so this part can be solved using Newton's method, not just using a gradient descent. And this part in theory is very clear. So we make half the black box to be transparent. Okay, then we can using GPU to implement this part. And this one has only one solution. Okay, so the computation is stable. So then we test other cases. So here we put file by file modes. So each orange dot representing a mode. Then we try to learn this modes, okay, using a different method. So if we use a GAN, so the green dots actually are generated samples. We see the GAN model mix some modes, okay. If we use a PEG-GAN, so PEG-GAN will cover all the modes here, but also they will generate a lot of fake examples among all the gaps. So for our model, we get a better result here, okay. So therefore, we can accurately locate them. So we can visually compare using VE or WGAN, we generated handwritten digits. So that's our result. So using conventional method, we generate face. We see a lot of ghost faces here, which caused by mode collapse or mode mixture. Okay, but using our model, we get a better result. Okay. So then also we test on different data set. Okay, then compare with different metrics. So our system has a better performance. Okay, so in conclusion, so basically, so here we try to use a geometry to understand the deep learning. So then we believe that the intrinsic pattern or natural data can be represented by manifold distribution principle. So therefore, deep learning has two major tasks. One is manifold learning, one is probability learning. Then the latter can be carried out using optimal transportation theory. So it can assign a remaining metric, okay, to the space. Also, we can carry out variational optimization. Then by linear theory, we see that the generator and the discriminator, they should collaborate, okay, instead of compete with each other. Then by the regularity theory from motion pay equation, we can explain mode collapse. So by separating the two tasks and design a new model, we can avoid mode collapse and make half of the black box to be transparent. Okay, so we published several papers in fundamental mathematics or also in computer vision, okay, machine learning, geometric modeling. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we still well, little less than 10 minutes for questions. So go ahead.
Could I ask you, do you explicitly ask for the autoencoder to be reversible, to be invertible?
Yes, for generating model, because we want to generate the real models. So in this case, the autoencoder should be invertible. So the decoding map should decode the latent code. Yes.
And how do you impose the? How are you sure that I mean, even for a ReLU network, you can have piecewise functions that are, that fold over. How do you impose that the Jacobian never becomes singular?
So that's a really good question. Yeah, actually, so far we're just using a conventional autoencoder framework. So basically, given every training sample, then we go through the encoder and decoder, we get a reconstruct result. We try to compare the L2 distance between the real sample and the reconstructed sample. Then we take in summation, then we minimize the total loss. Yeah. So then just by brute force. So so far there's no guarantee. So that the mapping should be diffeomorphic. But using the normalized flow method or using a Lorentz idea, we can explicitly control the Jacobi for each step. I think in that direction is definitely very promising. Yeah.
And another very quick question: the Whitney or Takens theorems for trying to embed in higher dimensional spaces to make sure that the manifolds are one-to-one. Does that come in somewhere? Like, when you have the bunny, if the bunny folds, as you said, you go to higher dimensions, then you would not fold. Is there some place where Whitney's theorem interacts with what you do?
Well, actually, so personally, I believe, so for deep learning, when they do this kind of feature extraction or manifold embedding, they implicitly based on Whitney embedding theorem. Yeah. So if we really do physical experiment, we see that the first several layers should be with very high dimension. Otherwise, we get a failure all the time. So this means that at the beginning, we increase the embedding dimension, then we do projection little by little. Yeah. But so far,
let me just say, a quick question, and I will shut up. In the place where you indeed showed that things were not one-to-one, you had the curve that was monotonic, and then you had the curve that was was not a function anymore. And then you talked about breaking it into pieces so that the pieces were monotonic. And I was just wondering if that is a place where Whitney would come in. Instead of trying to break it into pieces, you embed in just enough dimensions, and then everything is one-to-one. Or at least that's a quick thought.
Yes, I fully agree with you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, actually, there are a lot of people trying to do this using local PCA embedding. Then they combine the local PCA embedding together. Yeah, then they do projection. So they try to mimic Whitney embedding idea, but so far still under development. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any? Well, actually, I had just a purely technical question. But at some point, you mentioned that like the Wasserstein metric and the Eschen metric on the space operative measures were equivalent. In what? So, what is in what sense exactly? Is it just equivalent the metric?
Oh, I see. So basically, in today's deep learning society, people using a maximum entropy principle. So they try to maximize entropy given the different constraints, like we know the expectation for some functions. Then we know that along the geodesic in Wasserstein space, the entropy function is a convex. So therefore, we can use the Heisen or entropy to define another remaining metric. And locally, we have two remaining metric. One is a Wasserstein metric, one is entropy Heisen matrix. And these two metrics are equivalent in some sense. So therefore, if we do optimization using entropy, then we can reformulate to do optimization using Wasserstein. So in general, they will give us the same optimal result. So that's what I want to say. Yeah.
Okay.
So therefore, we can reformulate the popular existing deep learning method using Wasserstein framework. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does anyone has any more questions for David? I think we are almost out of time, but we still have 2 minutes.
I had a question if nobody else has any questions. So when you presented the OMT view of Wasserstein GAN in the L2 case, you said that the optimal generator can be obtained from the optimal discriminator. So it is known that if you have the optimal generator, you can obtain the optimal discriminator. So how do you compare these two sort of results together, or are they compatible with each other? Or are you in a setting which is different from the traditional setting?
David, are you still here?
May have disconnected.
I think we might have lost David.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it must have been this connection. Well, okay, sorry about that. And you can submit maybe your question by email if you want, or I could ask David when I see him again. But I think it's time maybe we can stop. We can stop the seminar here. Yeah, I don't know what happened. But.
So Nicola, you have separate Zoom links for the oh, there's David.
Okay, I'll come back. Yeah, sorry that the network was not stable. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
So
Okay.
what's the last question? Yeah, sorry for that.
Yeah, we'll take this last question, but sorry. Can you repeat it?
So I was just saying that you mentioned that the generator can be obtained from the optimal discriminator. And I was comparing it to the fact that we know that if we have the optimal generator, we can obtain the optimal discriminator. So I was asking, how do you compare these two set of results? Are they compatible with each other? Or
Yeah, actually, the generator gave us the mapping from white noise to the fake distribution. Then the discriminator gave us the mapping from fake distribution to the real distribution. So then by composing those two mapping, we get a transport mapping from white noise to the real distribution. So that's the real goal for the whole GAN model. So therefore, so if you get accurate generator, accurate discriminator, you just combine them once. So the computation, okay, the iteration is unnecessary. So that's the point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think, yeah, I will look into your work and see your theoretic deduction. Yeah, I think there should be some equivalence there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, I think it's a good time to stop. We are right on time. So thank you again, David.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again for coming. So can give a round of applause.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Oh, thank you.
So,
thank you.
But thank you again for coming. And well, there's a couple of meetings in the afternoon for people who registered. But otherwise, yeah, for all the other people, see you next week, I guess, or next seminar.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
See you. Bye.
Yeah, see you. Bye.
Bye.